Okay, to all, delighted to have you today for this webinar where we're going to speak about some of the results and conversations around the 2026 edition of Risk in Focus. And of course, we're going to talk about cybersecurity, and we are going to see how important that topic is. My name is Guy Goldstein. I've been leading a couple of efforts around cyber with the French chapter of CIA, and also I've been trying to run a couple of those panels for the Risk in Focus over the last 3-4 years. With us, I am delighted to have a panel of very esteemed and distinguished experts on that topic. We shall have with us Raoul Virquet. Raoul, you're the head of IT and audit analytics at TUI Group, which is one of the world's leading tourism group. And you'll bring your own perspective on the cybersecurity situation on the view as from the audit side, evidently, and we'll all look at that from the audit side. Also with us, Gaute Brednitsen, and sorry if I don't pronounce it perfectly, you'll have all the time to correct me as long as you want, Gaute. Gaute, you're the Chief Audit Executive for Gniesidich. Again, feel free to correct me, sorry, but which is a leading Nordic insurance group listed on the Oslo Stock Exchange, and bring also with you a long track and career in audit. Also with us, Gerhard Freihans. Gerhard, you're the head of IT audit and data analytics at Unicor Insurance Group, which I believe is based in Austria. And also, you come with a distinguished career in auditing in banking and insurance. And also, I believe we have with us Luca LaGuardia. Luca, great to have you with us equally. You are the head of internal audit for Fabric, which is a very interesting startup that develops open banking and open payment services. And previous to that, you've been working with the London Stock Exchange Group, Euronext, and so forth. Also, you bring evidently lots of all your professional experience and career to that conversation. So what I'll do is that I'll be just briefly showing a few interesting slides, I believe, from this edition of Risk in Focus, and then we'll jump into what is the most interesting, which is evidently the conversations with our 4 distinguished guests and panelists. So if we look at 2026, this Risk in Focus edition, and we can go in the next slide. So as you may know, a few important topics have been actually researched by the teams of Risk in Focus. We have had about many different participants, up to 879 respondents, chief audit executives, covering, as it mentioned, all sectors and industry across 15 European countries, with several additional in-depth interviews. So really to not only bring a sort of statistical report, but try to bring some meat and some thoughts about what's going on for auditors. And that's the topic of the day, especially in cybersecurity, and that's the next slide. What has been very clear, if we look at the next slide, is that in 26, as in 25, cybersecurity still remains the top risk for auditors and also internal controllers. And that seems to be a very dominant position. It's been the case, by the way, as the top 1 risk since, I believe, the 2021 edition. So indeed, cybersecurity represents today a core issue for auditors and internal controllers. And mind you, if you look at the top 5 risks today, we also have digital disruption and new technology and AI, which has come up this year as the top number 3. And that, of course, relates to cybersecurity. And of course, if you expand, if you look at human capital, diversity, talent management, there is also a big part of that around cyber. If you look at change in laws and regulation in Europe with NIS2, with DORA and CRA and all sorts of new regulation, that also pertains in part with cyber. And if we talk about macroeconomic and especially geopolitical uncertainty, and we'll delve a bit into that, indeed, we will have also to speak also about cyber. So even when it's not cyber, it's also a little bit cyber. If you look at the next slide, where actually auditors spend most of their time, and we'll speak a little bit about that. Well, not only cyber is the top risk, but today is where actually auditors spend the most time. And that's also something which is important to note. And if I may add, if you look at the third place where auditors spend the most time, which is business continuity, operational resilience, crisis management, disaster response, then evidently, again, there is a big part of that, which is, again, also cyber. And then last slide, and I'll be off, and we'll finally be hearing from the real experts here. If you ask going forward, this is the picture today, but if you look at tomorrow, in 3 years from now, what are going to be the top 5 risks? Well, what we see is that the number 1 risk as perceived today is still going to be cyber and data security. And the number 2 risk will be, or maybe, digital disruption, new technology and AI, which we'll talk also today. And of course, that is also in large part, related to cyber. So all this long introduction to state that, in as much as companies can be seen as with a financial assets, human assets, hardware assets, tangible, intangible assets, well, today the part of the digital assets is extremely important and fundamental to the functioning of corporations. And also to say that if you decided to come today to this webinar as an auditor, you have made the right choice. So now that the slides are off, finally we can go into the most important, which is the conversation. And again, for that, I'll have a chance to be discussing with Raoul, Gaute, Gerhard, and Luca. And for the 4 of you, I'll start with a very broad initial question. Basically, from your standpoint and your own views, how have you seen the threat level evolve since the last year or the last 2 years? And if you had to mark that by a grade from 1 to 5, 1 is rapidly declining, and 5 is very much increasing, and 3 is about stable. How would you see that? Let's make a big round. Let's start with Raoul, and then Gaute, and Luca, and then Gerhard, if that's okay with you.
I think it is as high as always. So from a pure perception point of view, I would say it's potentially stable, while others potentially climb around up and down. The cybersecurity is persistently high. We need to think about if the high is the same high as 2 years ago, and how high, or what means high in 2 years' time. I think this is more something where we need to think about. If we now would say it is rated as 4 in a 1 to 5 rank, is this the same 4 as last year, and how will 4 look like next year?
And just Raoul, what's your view on that? Is it the same 4 as the 4 before, or is it a stronger 4? And are we moving into a very strong 4 or 5 perhaps compared to today?
I think that's, it's anyhow a good question. What does it really mean if the 4 is a 4? I would say the 4 is permanently evolving. The 4 is changing with the threat landscape. The threat landscape is getting harder. So it's somehow like a cat and mouse. So cat and mouse game. You are getting to the point of fulfilling or defending the 4 from attackers. Are the attackers now at a 5? Potentially yes. Or is just another level of a 4, and we need to maintain our level of 4? So that's for me the question behind. Yeah, and as you were saying, it is increasing. This 4 seems to be increasing.
Okay, so we see increasing 4s. Gaute, what's your standpoint on that and the level of threats, the threat level today?
It's basically the same that Raoul is saying, and I totally agree with him. And it's basically more along the methods they use and how they continue to evolve their capabilities as attackers as well. What we are more worried about in the threat level is basically how are their capabilities evolving in taking down the big hyperscalers. Basically, when I mean hyperscalers, I think about the big public cloud offerings like Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, Amazon. And if they basically, we've seen some incidents now where basically they can almost take down all of the Western world by some fault in Amazon, for example, or that some white hat hacker fortunately found a huge vulnerability in Azure. We were just lucky it wasn't. We hope that it wasn't an attacker that found it first. So in that capability, I think that when white hat hackers can find these kind of vulnerabilities, you bet that these nation states and the others are finding them and keeping them in position for doing real harm when they need to. So in the financial cert that we have in the Nordics, which is quite mature, they are also rating the threat picture as high and still high. And we're worried most about the crime groups and the national state actors who are the ones we are more scared about. In the banking sector, you see that the threats are going more towards customers of the banking, and that's their entry point in, and that's always been high still, that they take out the customers, even private or commercial customers.
Great. So high, very high, and a whiff of nation state actors. We'll get back to that later in the conversation indeed. Luca, from your standpoint, how do you see the threat evolving? Again, a strong 4, a high to very high, or you're stable from your standpoint?
Yes, from my perception is, we have to discuss about maybe the preparation of the companies. So if at the beginning, so cybersecurity was 5, but because maybe we were not so prepared like now, so this is the big difference. So now I think at least for the financial sector, the financial services are stable. But stable means that is not. I don't want to say that attackers are not evolving, are not preparing new way of attack, but by the fact that maybe we are better prepared to receive these attacks. So we are well structured and we can face in a better way what is happening in the market. For sure, there are some other topics that are new, like artificial intelligence, that can maybe we can discuss later. Then can increase this kind of risk. But according to me, is maybe stable 3 towards 4. But it depends if you consider also AI or not.
Okay, well, we will consider AI for sure, later in the conversation. But as I understand, indeed, there's this high threat. But what you're stating, actually, Luca, is that the level of preparation has increased. We'll get a little bit into that. So maybe in the cat and mouse game that Raoul mentioned, perhaps, well, basically, I don't know who's the cat and who's the mouse, but it seems that at least the good guys are somehow catching up a little bit. Gerhard, and you'll have the chance to conclude this short round. From your standpoint and your views and your experience, what do you see in these cat and mouse games? And are we facing strong 4 and you're reaching to 5s, or we're moving back to 3s?
If we look at the study you presented before, the cyber risk is so far ahead, it doesn't really matter if it's high, very high, critical, apocalyptic, or however you would look at it. I think the important part is that we start acting on it and not panicking, but acting with reason on it. And of course, some new scenarios like AI and the latest news that AI is capable of orchestrating cyber espionage attacks, of course, are worrying me. But still, up to now, I haven't seen an AI developing a hacking method that really can compromise a well-protected and well-monitored system. So for this reason, my we have to do our homework first, and then also newer developments and higher emerging risks will not affect us that strongly.
Okay, so I see some moderating points, and that's interesting to have this wide range of opinion. But at any rate, we're definitely above the 3. That's my own take. And as you stated, we need to continue to do the homework, which is, as you aptly pointed, what we see actually in the stats that we presented initially. Speaking about the dimension of maturity, I would like to go back to what you said, Luca. How are organizations getting more mature with regards to cybersecurity?
I think that now, as I said before, are well prepared. So maybe there are new responsibilities now. Roles are clearer compared to the past. There is, more cybersecurity awareness in the companies. Also at the board level, for instance, now for financial services, is mandatory to have someone who is expert on cyber or on IT topics. Maybe in the past it was not like that, but it is part of this path to be ready to face this kind of risk. I can say that from organization point of view, maybe the only point I wanted to raise is the fact that maybe organizations are ready, there are new roles, but maybe talking about internal department, maybe we are facing challenges because maybe the people we hire some specialistic position, but anyway, maybe the risks are huge and you are not hiring enough people to face everything. So this is maybe the point.
Okay, the very clear at any rate, the roles and responsibilities are clearer today, better awareness. And you mentioned also the elements of regulation. And actually, it's a question I wanted to ask you, Gaute. How are regulation actually really helping, and are they always good, or can they create some sort of distortions from time to time?
Well, I see basically we have in the financial sector, we have Digital Operational Resiliency Act, DORA, which is a heavier weight regulation than NIS2 for the other industries. I think that the DORA regulation is very specific about what we should have in place, very descriptive, which I think is a good thing. So basically, you have to stretch the organization, you have to actually implement something to make it work. On the other hand, it's the other side where I'm more worried about is basically if it's just a compliance check where you're just looking for paper. But we in audit, we are going deeper, of course, so we will look at it, see that it's actually implemented. And I think when it comes to maturity of organization, I think it helps to be build maturity from the board level and down to the technical parts. And I think also when the organization is becoming more mature, a key concept also is basically following the supply chain. And basically that you're not stronger than the weakest link per se. This is a popular thing to say, but if you go down to the vendors and start to look at how they implement it and how they can actually, if someone attacked the vendor or something happened at the vendor site, how could that affect your operations? I think that's a very, very important thing to pay in mind, because at least in the Nordic companies who are very digital in the financial sector, the vendor landscape has grown from one traditional big vendor to several vendors. And then you have so much more to follow up.
I understand that. There was in previous preparation for this conversation, we mentioned that there may be some sort of gap between what would be the technical preparation and what could be the organizational preparation. So I don't know, Gerhard, perhaps if you wanted to speak a little bit about that.
Sure. The interesting part from my perspective is the regulation. It's clear for me that we are kind of concerned of being over-regulated, but most what DORA and NIS2 are requesting are basically things that were in the framework and norms for centuries. So for this reason, the things the regulations now asked us to do shouldn't be something new, but seeing the created additional workload in the companies actually shows why these regulations are necessary, because otherwise these things apparently wouldn't have been done. But the important part, as you mentioned, is kind of the cyber teams are very often well prepared. I guess we have to look at the organizational maturity, particularly in the area of crisis management. So really to have clear playbooks, to have a clear situational report in case of a crisis, to have working communication channels and decision mechanisms within the crisis team, and to not just have these things stipulated in some governance rules and some nice papers produced, but to really have these things trained and operational in tabletop exercises or even real life simulations.
Right. Okay. So real life simulation, very important, so that the whole, as I understand, the whole of a company and not just the cyber teams really, gets in the groove of what needs to do. And as Gaute mentioned, to have this increase of maturity from the board down somehow. But Gaute, you'll be able to correct me if I was wrong on that. Moving into something which actually I would say struck me, but actually it's been like 3 years that I run this kind of panel, and I have a bit of a whiff of what's going on with regard to cyber and audit. In terms of resource allocation, but if we look, for example, at the stat from Risk in Focus, we see that actually there's a huge chunk of resource for the audit teams today that goes into cyber. Perhaps, Raoul, do you have a sense of, from your experience, the conversations you may have with perhaps other audit teams, where do we stand today in terms of how much people and resource in the audit should go into cyber?
Yeah, I think it depends a bit what you're looking at from which perspective you're looking at it. However, if you reflect what happened over the last 10, maybe 15 years, I need to come back what Gaute has already said. We have a much higher dependency on IT system, also much more dependency on external facing systems. I think that has changed our landscape over the last 10, 15 years massively. So we have higher dependencies, we have larger scales. On that, looking at the hyperscaler, for example, so we are depending on really very critical things. It's becoming more complex. The threats are becoming more complex. So we should have expected a real increase and in resource allocation. What we are seeing right now, it is really depending. The dedication ranges from 25% up to 70%, according to what the Risk and Focus, or what the studies are saying at the moment. Some smaller financial institutions even spend up to 60-70%, assuming that these are potential fintech-like companies who naturally have much more in IT or in IT audit, whereas others are spending 25-33% if we are looking at other factors. And it also depends if, for example, fraud is more a topic in this sense. So cyber attacks, fraud is more a sense in that company. And it also depends, that's my own experience, how strong the second line is set up. So if you, for example, have a very strong cybersecurity second line of defense in your company, it may also the case that the dedication to cybersecurity in the audit department can be adjusted to a little bit lower.
Makes much sense. So we're going to move into the threat landscape now. And in previous conversations, we mentioned 3 main topics. One around AI. We already started to speak a little bit about that. The other one about geopolitical threats. And then also the ongoing improvement of the cyber community, because those guys have a business to run. And of course, they themselves are going to increase and be more sophisticated. So starting with AI, the one question I would have for Gauti, and that's part of a preparation conversations that we had. I think we mentioned by Gerhard that we haven't seen the fully automated AI hackers yet, so no Terminator or Skynet running the show yet. But in terms of deepfakes and voice cloning, which actually can be quite important, especially in the financial industry, how do you see the situation? What's going on out there? That's for Gauti.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So I think there are several potential things around AI. So we work in insurance, so we are, of course, seeing insurance fraud. We're seeing some pointers in people that are using now fake pictures, fake receipts that are AI generated to try to fake an insurance claim. So that's kind of the pending threat. We have a Nordic financial institution who had a deep fake on an internal Teams call. So we've seen that in real life. That was really with a voice and a video, looked like the real person. Not in my company, but another company. They're open about it, which I think is also important to think about from a threat level perspective. When I think about the other important threats, we can still call it threats when it comes to mistakes or internal use. So I think with the advantage you have with AI as an employee, being more productive, basically having short time and basically using AI, generative AI specifically, to improve your work. There's a huge point of shadow AI, basically sending data from your organization to an external AI solution, where basically you were supposed to protect it in internal systems. So basically, if you don't make AI available to your employees, then you're going to be quite sure that they're using external AI solutions. And that's a threat as well, that you're sending data out that should not be out there. And the other threat about AI is that you use AI for the wrong purpose. So basically, it's the misuse of AI, which is also how the organization adapts AI and uses AI in the wrong way. And we've seen so many bad examples of this that comes out in the media. So that you just think the shadow numbers are quite high.
That's a very interesting point, and thanks for putting some flesh on the issue of deepfakes. But also you mentioned shadow AI. Luca, in terms of shadow AI, great point that Gauti has mentioned, which is indeed a very widespread both opportunity but also threats for organization. How organizations should think about this situation around shadow AI? How should they protect themselves? Why not necessarily restricting the use of AI? Because that's also now part of a competitive field.
I agree with you that shadow AI is a big risk because there is the possibility for the employees to use the shadow AI instead of authorized software, for instance. What we have done, in my experience, you can provide your employees with authorized software of generative AI so that employees have a software to use. But anyway, I think it's quite difficult to restrict the access to these other tools because maybe you can, I don't know, put some blocks in the internet website in order to prevent the access to the website, I don't know, for ChatGPT, for instance. But anyway, the people can access using other instruments like smartphones, like other tools. So that is important for our training, awareness, and especially put in place an ethic code in order to tell people that they have to use authorized software and not using a shadow AI to perform their job. Then understand that maybe for a developer to use a shadow AI tool can help in the production of the software. So this is the point.
Okay, very clear, and indeed you're quite right, as Gauti, to stress the problematic importance of shadow AI. You also mentioned the issue of developers, and thanks to AI now, everybody can be some sort of coder. We can even vibe code. But that and that happens in many corporations that I've seen. But indeed, that can pose a problem. And that was a question to Gerhard. Are we sure that all this plumbing, these new tools, the new assets that are being used and that are developed with AI, using AI, that all that is sound and solid, or are there some issues here too?
This is the biggest question, I think, because AI is evolving in the highest pace we ever experienced as a mankind. So for this reason, due to this high pace, the security aspects are not at the forefront of all these developments. So security by design is not really in the mentality of this currently ongoing AI rush. So which makes kind of AI solution very fragile. And also the attack surface is for us not really comprehensible at the moment, because if we look at, for example, the model context protocol, in which way this could enable a prompt injection, or which layers we have to define and which controls we have to define to prevent our data from being compromised, has to be really shown in the future. And also if there are controls and if there are guardrails in place, also they have to prove that they are effective and really prevent the risks. So for this reason, we really have to see how well, how secure AI is, and also if there are controls needed, how effective these controls are.
Yeah, very great points indeed. It's not only the users inside the company using shadow AI, but it's going to be the developers, in as much as actually we all may become developers to some extent. And then, as you correctly stress, the importance of security by design, which may not be at all there, and new controls that will need to be there. Moving into a new bucket of important risk. Of course, we've all seen the news and the many different clouds in terms of geopolitical threats that are now amassing, especially around Europe. So I was very interested to have a view from one of our experts from the Nordics, Gaute. How do you see this issue of geopolitics built into cyber risk? And if you allow us in this conversation to be a little more precise about a couple of nation states, where do you see, are some of the nation states that they may be the more problematic?
Well, from the advanced persistent threat to nation state actors, we see, of course, some of the countries who are being active in attacking Western world organizations and other parts of the world as well, of course. What we are more worried about as well is basically what kind of functions inside a company do you need to be aware of, how you hire people with different backgrounds. So basically being more strict from background checks. And then, of course, you are more aware of people coming from countries that could be affected by intelligence services that are not in our interest. And in Norwegian law, basically, you can discriminate on this for if you have a risk analysis on different positions that is not compatible with that kind of risk. But also we are seeing in the landscape, basically, we are also worried about countries that are cooperating closely with, for example, Russian intelligence. And then you have to put in place protection mechanisms in order to protect yourself against that. And of course, we see that Chinese tech is also something in critical infrastructure in Europe that you are more aware of, that how do you actually protect yourself against a risk that you're not willing to accept. And a worry that we didn't have last year, but a worry that's been rising this year is basically the political weaponization of cloud services. So basically, coming from the American administration, or per se Trump in specific, could he potentially use cloud as a political weapon? And that's it's very difficult. It's easy to say. It's very difficult to basically protect against. But at least talking about exit plans and how you can live without a cloud vendor is potential that we all have to discuss anyhow.
Definitely, and thanks for this range of issue. Of course, there's the issue around Russia, evidently, especially since the invasion of Ukraine. But as you mentioned, problem around China's tech. We know that there's still issues. Problems around countries that still have cooperation in terms of intel cooperation with Russia, and some of those countries maybe to some extent some of our allies too, so that you can pose some difficulties. And as you aptly mentioned, also the new issue of what do we do with cloud as the United States and its political structure may be changing. So this points to, interestingly, two points around people and around cloud. I'd like to ask, to Roel, how do we think about people's risk linked to some of those countries while still trying to be ethical, evidently?
I think it's a rather difficult question. I think we had in the preparation meeting some discussions around that in some jurisdictions it's now allowed to exclude some nationals from being hired into specific security positions, etc., and audit roles. This may reduce the risk, yes, but some participants, and also including me, I would feel ethically uncomfortable with it. So I think that we have the whole representatives of the participants. Some may feel okay. So in some aspects it might be needed. In some other aspects, I think we all should behave ethical.
Definitely. And then thanks for really stressing the difficulty of that question. But indeed, it is a question now, which is put on the table. And as you stated, each organization with its own culture, with its own risk profile, also evidently, will have to deal with that question. When I move into also what Gaute mentioned in terms of cloud, especially in Europe, and this question may be for Gerhard, how do we deal with this kind of new risk which is emerging with, that already happened, with the Cloud Act of 2018 in the United States, where we knew that we may have some issues, but that now may be compounded by the fact that we're not fully sure that the United States, as we used to know, is going to remain the same. So how do we deal with that, Gerhard, especially on the cloud front?
I think this is the most decisive IT questions we're having in Europe or even the non-US sphere of the world is how can we maintain our digital sovereignty? So how can we protect our digital lives in the future? And this is for me something really personal because I put my money where my mouth is. I personally invest in the development of a European GRC platform at the moment because I think especially for cloud service provider, it is not just important that we look where our data is stored and if it's really in a European data center. The bigger question is, especially in this regard, are we technologically sovereign? So our technological sovereignty is particularly the key point. Are we able, with this proprietary software, to maintain our key functions? Is the source code available? Are we even capable of running these technologies on our own? And have we reliable and transparent service providers that serve us in our daily life and our daily business? So for this reason, we shouldn't get distracted by the most shiny new features. So we really should focus on being able to control our critical business functions because our customers will judge us on our capabilities to maintain our core business and not on the most cutting edge AI features.
Okay, well, so nicely put. Understand what are your critical business functions, and then try to remediate for this new risk that may have not existed a few years ago, and now which is popping up. If we round up this issue on threat landscape, I'd just like to have one or two questions around the new sophistication next to the issue of geopolitics that we mentioned and the issue of AI, which is a big one. How do we see this the new evolution of and the sophistication of cyber criminality. Perhaps, Luca, we've come to think for a long time that multi-factor authentication was, one of those great defense systems that could help save the day. Is it still the case?
I think that okay, multi-factor authentication is a necessity, but it's not sufficient. So now there are new ways of penetrate the systems, and so I think you need to have much awareness within your company. So the fact that the multi-factor authentication can be bypassed, especially you have to spread around the company the awareness, and especially to prevent the possibility for social engineering. So I think we have to study additional measures. So this is the point.
Okay, very clear. And we understand that what we thought would be, the old protection are not working neither. I'll just mention also, part of a conversation that we had, that indeed there is an extension of collaboration among attackers, and that we may see, and this is the latest news, new ransomware moving into operational technology, which is, of course, the IT for the factory, the plant, and so forth. So now that we have this view on the threats, let's try to think about how we can prepare indeed for those threats, how we can increase our organization, for example, in terms of resilience and post-breach reaction. We'll speak about cyber talent and also, of course, AI. So indeed, how can we prepare our organization in terms of resilience and post-breach reaction? Some of the points that came out in our preparatory conversations was the issue of crisis management, and that may not be always up to par. So that would be to your role. What's the station of crisis management? How can we make it better?
Yeah, I think you already mentioned the point of crisis management, but we need to see and look at from an audit perspective on the whole chain of involved parties in the company. And then it comes to the question about what is the weakest link. Looking again back into the past, we were a lot discussing about IT continuity. Okay, that's maybe one part. Then we were speaking about business continuity. And now it's also coming into crisis management. So all these things need to be tied very well together, and there shouldn't be a weak link in between of these elements, because some of these elements alone will not work alone. I think we need to have the whole business continuity function which needs to work, which includes the crisis management, as you were saying. Yes, now with the new legislations or with the new regulations of NIS and DORA, it's going into a more structured way, and we need to have it embedded in the continuity planning. But from what we have discussed upfront and what the studies are saying, the participants are still rating the technical security higher than the organizational ability for crisis management. So I think this is an area where crisis management may need to evolve further to get into a complete and functionality or comprehensive business continuity management.
Okay, so these are very important points indeed. Let's not focus just but on the tech, but look at the organizational level to take it, of course, because we're here among auditors from an audit perspective, and to see what could be the weakest link between IT continuity, business continuity, and crisis management. So very, very important things here to move out of just the purely technical aspects. Indeed, Gauti, you mentioned that maturity needs to be built from the board down, I believe, and you'll have all the time to correct me if you feel so. How do you indeed, two questions to you, how do you build this board level awareness? And part of that, how do we, we always talk about risk appetite, okay, as a key element. How do we make it, concrete? What is this risk appetite? So question to you, Gauti.
Well, I think a couple of things that I think if a lot of people here are in internal audits, I can give 4 things to look for So if you don't have a good involvement of the board of directors and the group management in setting what are our most critical assets or processes in the company and what would be the acceptable level of operational efficiency if we had a total blackout of everything and all the companies, in what order should we, which companies are most important, which processes are the most important, going from priority 1 to 2. So for example, it could be a daughter company that should have a process coming up for the mother company, and then maybe the mother company on 2 processes, and then another company. So basically how we involve and also exercise with the board to help setting the risk appetite. What is the operational effectiveness we have in downtime, and how much data can we afford to lose? And if you set group management and the board together to discuss these things, you will find things quickly about what are the most important things for the company. Because what I see from some companies is they start with a big like continuity program and we will build things from the bottom up. You have to do both. So if you work in internal audit and you see that group management and where the board has not been involved at all, then you should be worried. Take that into account. Also take into account the vendors. And another problem is that I see is that a lot of also from other people in the financial sector is that a lot of Raoul said that the technical parts have basically had focus, and I totally agree. But still, it's for some parts it's still kind of immature because it's silo focus. They usually test one silo down with one system. The problem if you have ransomware and you need to risk construct from the start, if you restore hundreds of systems, how will you get data sync with different timestamps of backups? And the systems are not built for this normally, that they can restore data sync, and it's a hard job. So if you don't start to exercise this and take these discussions, you will have a recovery time objective that will be broken if you really have this disaster. And another thing I think internal audit should look for is, are the backups really protected? So what happened over time is that a lot of backups went online to virtual tapes. Can they be taken by the same disaster? And that's the basically, will the company live after ransomware or not? You can have all the insurance in the world that you want, but if you can't protect your backups, then you're screwed. So that was a long story about this.
Indeed. One point, sorry, and then we'll get to Gerhard and to Luca. But in terms of risk appetite, how do we make that concrete? You know, how can board and I say that because it's often this big concept, and people say, well, I'm a little bit, I'm more risk appetite, but at the end of the day, what does it really mean? And how can we make that really meaningful?
Yeah, so I think go from risk appetite, operational risk, risk appetite medium, go from there to being concrete about what kind of things can happen to our company and write it like a story. To say, we would have 5 customers who were angry and lost us. Okay, we have appetite for that, but we would have 1 million customers who would leave us the next day. Maybe that's not within the appetite. So I saw one player in the financial industry who had a board member who was really good at doing this and wanting this discussion with the board. And they made it very concrete in words and stories about the company, and not compliance risk, operational risk, market risk, and generalization of risk appetite. But I think you have to really have these stories with the board and group management to put into words what would they not tolerate, and what would really be unacceptable.
Very clear. Run the stories, the simulation, and understand, you know, in the guts what is not acceptable and what is somehow, well, I'd say okay, but you know, it's a big one.
Yeah. Work with scenarios.
Yes, indeed, scenarios always the best. If we switch for the sake of time into AI, we mentioned the issue of shadow AI, which is a big one. Gerhard, you mentioned the issue of security by design. What should we do with shadow AI? And maybe can we use AI to control shadow AI?
This is the biggest questions, but who controls then the controlling AI? So it goes on and on and on. So I think the important part with AI is definitely that cyber attacks will be definitely evolve by AI, but they will not become radically new, because if we think of AI, the AI learns on existing data. So it means that it's currently not very common that it develops entirely new radical ideas, but maybe I will be proven wrong in the very future. So for this reason, also here I want to emphasize we have to get the basics right, and then we mitigate a very huge portion of the risk that is coming with the security aspects of AI. However, what you mentioned, this shadow AI topic, will be one that will concern us in the future, because particularly also a lot of applications we have already now in use are now implementing some fancy new AI features. And when I discussed with my vendors, they said that they developed their own model, which I was kind of a bit skeptical, because developing an own large language model that is performing adequately could kind of use some resources. So for this reason, also here we have to manage our service providers very well, and we have to keep a very tight grip on existing AI solutions, but also, as mentioned before, that people just go around controls, so that they use their own AI or use some VPN channels to go around and insert data there. So here, I think shadow AI to be controlled with technical controls will be very hard. In this case, the human firewall is the most important part. Gain awareness, provide easy, accessible working solutions to our colleagues, and then they will use those in and not kind of turn to AI solutions we don't want to have in our companies and feed them with data we don't want to leave our company borders.
Very clear. Getting back to basics, but some perspective on how things could evolve indeed, and AI controlling AI and whatnot, which could happen. Just broadening up, and then we'll have closing words, because time flies. In the preparatory conversation, in terms of getting the awareness of the top management, we mentioned issues around the ability to quantify the risk. And there may be still some problems. So I don't know, Raoul, I wanted to have a bit of your view on how do we deal with this issue of cyber risk quantification?
A good question, because I don't have a proper answer to that. However, from the preparation, we have definitely seen the gap there how to quantify it. Yeah. Everyone talks about that we need to quantify cyber risks or the impact from cyber risk, but we really don't know how to do it. There are not so many robust models in place, robust quantification models in place, so that most investment decisions remain based either on regulatory requirements or on gut feelings. So that's definitely a gap which we still see here amongst our participants.
We need better methodologies if we can achieve them for this cyber risk quantification. That would be. And final questions around how we prepare for threats. That will lead to you, Luca. And that crosses around the issue of control, including perhaps why not third party. But how can we stress the importance of access control? How can we make it better?
I think maybe apart that I can talk about my experience. So access control is very important, because if you don't have roles exactly defined in the company, so proper access defined, if you don't track, I don't know, generic users. So this is a big issue in the company. So what I stressed to my colleagues in the IT department is the importance to manage this. So what I check, because I think that everything is coming from us as user. We talked before about shadow AI, but if I can install software on my computer because I'm an admin and the proper access control was not put in place, this is for sure a big risk for the company. So this is some point that we stress in every audit, but especially the second line of defense, especially risk management in the operational risk committee, they stress this point. So the importance of this finding.
Very clear, and thanks for stressing that. All right, so we've done the big round. As closing statement, I'd be very happy to hear from each one of you four guys. What do you see ever as still your main remaining concern? What keeps you awake at night, and or what is the type of magic wand that you'd like one day to get? Again, your last thoughts on this huge topic of cybersecurity. Let's start with you, Gerhard, and then we'll do the round. Raoul, Gaute, and Luca.
So if you ask me what keeps you awake at night, I have 2 little kids, so most of the time it's them. But overall,
Same.
I think when you when you think on where we start to move and where we start to act, I think it's definitely the topic of digital sovereignty. We as European countries have to become digital sovereignty in order to maintain our digital lives and to protect our digital lives. And this is something that concerns me because time is running and we have to become fast and have to act now.
Very interesting. Noted, digital sovereignty. Raoul, your main issue, what keeps you at night? What do you want the field to change into?
But one response to Gerhard, my kids are grown up and adults already. They still keep me awake at night. So, but back to professional question, I think what keeps me awake is in the all ongoing audits, not to forget about the classical parts, responding back to what Luca has said. Authorization and access rights remain as important as in the last 20 years. Just imagine to have and to face an account takeover. If the account is under control of proper authorization and access management, it's much easier to deal with. Else, if we would just have focused on, let's say, more fancy things. So I think from a company perspective, this is the main thing to focus in the audits on. One of the main, but don't forget about it.
Very clear. Let's not forget the basics and the access that indeed Luca mentioned, despite all the conversations about AI and new things. Gaute, your main concern, final thoughts?
All the things mentioned before, and I include vendors like CCAG to audit the vendors. And then I also think basically vulnerability management on basically all this software we have.
Okay, yeah, vulnerability management, and let's make sure that everything is, it's going back to basics, but we should not forget them because indeed they're still right there. And final thoughts to you, Luca. Last comments or what keeps you also at night, despite and not mentioning, of course, kids and children, of course.
No, not children, because I have some kids, but they are quite older, not so young. So I'm quite lucky now. And no, what keeps me awake during nights? I agree with some points that they've touched, like the sovereignty, the digital sovereignty of Europe. So now we are discussing about US from one side, China from the other. And just talking about, for instance, to digital euro, now the European Commission are moving also to clouds that are based in Europe. So this is maybe a big step to avoid the concentration of data, I mean, in the same providers, US providers. And second is the quantum computing, talking about, for instance, about the possibility to decrypt information, especially for password management. So quantum computing, especially in financial services, can reshape completely the story around passwords and the way how we access, or how our clients are accessing the systems.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. And that's a topic for next year, post quantum encryption. Thanks to you all. Thanks to you, Gerhard, Raoul, Gaute, Luca. Great conversations. And hopefully see you next year to see if cyber is still #1 among the risks in corporates and audits. Thanks again to you, and for whoever can do it, have a great lunch, and see you next year.
Thank you.